Welcome to the Punchline podcast. Today we are going to dive deep into the heart of journalism, politics, the media landscape, both locally and globally. I'm your host, Lawrence Seres, and today we have a very special guest joining us to discuss the intricacies of journalism in the United States and the critical link between academia and the newsroom. We aim to bridge the gap between Botswana and the US, exploring challenges and triumphs of media professionals in both regions. Today, we are honored to have with us David Mack, a renowned political journalist, author, and public speaker. David's expansive career includes roles as being editor at CNN, a senior editor at Politico, and the editor-in-chief of Campaigns and Elections. He has authored several influential books in American politics. Please look him up. His biography is very extensive, and I would like you to go and check out for yourselves. David Mack, welcome to the Punchline podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
And most importantly, welcome to Botswana.
Thank you. I'm having a wonderful trip here. About halfway through, about a week-long trip.
Okay.
My first time to this country. Beautiful. Met so many nice, fascinating people.
Yes.
So it's really a wonderful trip so far.
Quite interesting. I mean, on Monday when the embassy told me that you were coming to visit us, I was like, I'm interested in having a conversation with a journalist who has been practicing in the US, especially as an editor for a long time, and I've been an editor as well. I would like to have a proper exchange and learn a few things and get to understand what's happening in your region. So far, what's your role here? What brings you here?
Idea here is to talk to both practitioners, journalists in the field, also students and others who are interested in journalism, reporting, editing. It's a time the media is changing a lot. Unfortunately, the business is tough right now. It's tough in the US, it's tough in Botswana, it's tough in a lot of places. So the business models are really changing, but how you keep up those editorial standards, no matter what happens, how many cutbacks there are, and kind of what you focus on, how to make stories interesting, also how to get access to information, like with the Freedom of Information Act that's been in place in the U.S. for 57 years. I know there's a version of it that's under consideration here in Botswana. I think the most immediate thing, though, are the elections. There's elections coming up in October in Botswana, and in the U.S. in November. We've got some big changes too. Former President Donald Trump against Vice President Kamala Harris, who just became the Democratic candidate. So there's been all kinds of things to discuss.
So I understand that you have been at the University of Botswana. What type of exchanges were you having and what is your experience?
Yeah, I was talking to students and practicing journalists there about the Freedom of Information Act, kind of how we use it in the U.S. to get at information. Government agencies like to keep information secret, and how journalists can effectively try to dig up information that maybe government folks don't want them to have. Also, how to tell stories in a compelling way, like using real life examples where it's not just a bunch of boring statistics, but like if you want to talk about inflation, you don't just say, oh, prices rose 2.8%. You got to say, yeah, it was this many more expensive to buy groceries, or
bring in the human element.
Buy clothes, whatever it might be. Absolutely, because that's what people relate to.
So, David, can you tell me a little bit about your background before you can qualify to me why you are the right man to have the conversation with?
So I've been a political journalist in the U.S. in one form or another for most of my adult life or career. So you mentioned I was at Politico for a number of years, CNN for a while. I've worked at some other news outlets, written books. I used to cover Congress, so it was my job to go around and chase down lawmakers and try and get interviews with them. I was actually in the Capitol. I'm dating myself here, but I was in the Capitol building on September 11th, 2001, when there's an attack on Washington, D.C. So needless to say, that's a day I'll never forget. And I had a lot of different experiences. working with other journalists. These days now, I mostly edit other people's work, take what they come in. Sometimes I rewrite it or rework it. I still do some writing myself.
So obviously I'll be doing injustice if you're a celebrated journalist, and I don't ask you which one is maybe your favorite story that you think shaped your career and approach to journalism.
Which job that I had?
The story.
Oh, yeah. That one, September 11th, 2001, that was a big one. I think otherwise, mostly covering Congress on a daily basis, because I really learned just how to ask questions in a quick amount of time. Okay. When you're basically chasing people down, you just have them for a few seconds. You have to be able to put a question towards them. So I think that's really was most influential.
What was your story on 2011? Maybe I can look.
Oh, that was just trying to figure out what was going on at that point, because we know so much about it now, but that was all in the dark. But these days I try to do stories more that take some different angles, where everybody's covering the same piece of news. I like to take a step back and find out some different ways of looking at stories. So we had this, sadly, this assassination attempt against former President Donald Trump, the Republican nominee for president, and most journalists were just covering, what happened. So I tried to look at previous assassination attempts. Sadly, there have been a bunch, and kind of how they changed protection of presidents. And I don't think anybody else did that. So I was proud that I was able to get at something different there.
Yes. Okay, since you are here, I'm quite sure maybe you've done your research. What do you think are some of the key differences between the U.S. media and media in other countries, more particularly Botswana now, because it's the context we are discussing?
I think the biggest one is just the size, and that Botswana, the population here is about 2.4 million or so, somewhere in that range. In the United States, 330 million. So you're just going to have many more news outlets, and you have all these different cable outlets like CNN in the middle, Fox News conservative, MSNBC more progressive or liberal, and you have all these other different outlets all over the country. Here, it seems like there are just fewer outlets. Again, not surprising because of the numbers, but I think a big difference too, again, is the Freedom of Information Act, where we really have, in the U.S., it's mandatory that the government has to turn over information if it's asked within a certain reasonable time. And there are plenty of exceptions that allow them to get away with not doing that. But usually they get you some version of it. Where it's my understanding in Botswana, there's not anything like that. They're pushing toward it in Parliament, but it hasn't happened yet.
Yes. With our context, I believe that we are a very young democracy, a very young nation, to say the least. But I believe that there's still a lot that needs to be done in terms of acts that really protect journalism and advance the freedom of expression. I'm quite interested in understanding, especially in the U.S., what legal protection do U.S. journalists have to safeguard from retribution?
Right. It's a great question, and it's a little bit murky. It's not always clear because generally there's a tradition that prosecutors don't go after journalists to get their sources. You get some secret information that reveals something, and generally journalists are supposed to have an exemption, but it's not exactly clear if it's written into law or not. At the federal level, which laws that affect everybody, there actually is no journalist shield like that. U.S., of course, has 50 states in the Washington, D.C. Each state has most states have some version of a protection for journalists, but it varies widely. And so in the end, there's some protection, but not as much as you might think. Where I think there is a lot of protection compared to other societies is in terms of defamation and libel. It's very difficult to sue a journalist successfully, especially if you're a public figure. If you're an elected official, a musician, somebody the public generally knows, you basically have to prove that the journalist knew what they were printing was false and decided to go ahead with it anyway. It's a high bar to overcome.
It's quite obviously very, very different from here, because here I think a lot of media houses have been piled up with SLAP lawsuits,
Yes.
which are strategic litigation against public participation, especially by very powerful individuals. And we've seen it over the years happening in such a way that it is being used to weigh in an impact and develop, introduce fear
Yes.
into how journalists conduct their work, and how media owners actually now freely allow journalists to walk into certain places and do certain stories.
Yeah.
I think FOI can go a long mile in protecting us against that. But tell me then, in the context of the US, because I'm interested in understanding what is happening in your world, how effective then are these protections that we're talking about?
I think they're reasonably protective, but they're not foolproof by any measure. Oftentimes, actually, more recently, one of the biggest threats to journalists, it's not really the government going after with lawsuits. That's always there. It's more other private citizens.
Powerful figures.
Yeah, filing civil lawsuits that are aimed at basically bankrupting
Yes.
News organizations. There's some examples of this. There's this pro wrestler, Hulk Hogan, who sued this now out of business news outlet, Gawker, because it ran some tape of him, like a sex tape that was not very flattering, put it that way, that it got to its possession. And they did get it illegally somehow. And he basically sued them and he drove them out of existence. He was bankrolled by this billionaire guy, Peter Thiel, his big investor, who is very more libertarian and right-wing. And that sets a pretty dangerous precedent where, knowing that news organizations have limited resources financially to be able to sue them like that. And it's happening more and more, increasingly frequently.
I think here, I'm part of the Botswana Editors Forum. I think it's one of the items at the top of our bucket list that we really want it dealt with, with new legislations that is going to be coming anyway. We don't know when it will come, but at least we are trying to pursue an agenda that SLAP litigation be part of the main conversation where freedom of expression and freedom of press is concerned. Now tell me about ethical concerns journalism in the US. I mean, recent stories have highlighted that several ethical concerns in the US. Basically, there have been notable issues such as the premature use of AI in journalism, which has led to significant errors and ethical dilemmas at outlets such as CNET and Sports Illustrated. Another example that I know about is on the Tucker Carlson matter, on the Capitol riot. What do you have to say about this? Because there was a lot of criticism that the news pieces were misleading.
Well, there's some differences there. AI is one thing where we have to worry a lot about artificial intelligence and news creating deep fakes where it makes you look like you're one person. You can put the head of somebody on another person and you would never know the difference. You could just capture their voice and you could come up with them saying words that they never uttered. So I think the responsibility is with news organizations to be very careful what they publish, particularly from AI, and really hesitating, being skeptical about it and what they put out there. You should always be skeptical as a journalist, but it's just, there's so much of a higher bar for that now. And inevitably, some accidents are like those ones you mentioned are going to happen. But I'm hopeful that journalists can keep a distance, at least somewhat, on that. What he also mentioned was the idea of disinformation, and this is
with the Tucker
Carlson, yeah, exactly.
Yes,
where he's had some strange interviews and guests. He basically suggested that the January 6th rioters at the Capitol were the innocent ones, that they were the victims, when in reality they were there trying to overthrow a free and fair election and keep Donald Trump in office.
Of course.
That's the kind of thing that usually happens in other countries, not in the United States of America. So it's very concerning, a lot of what he said.
So what usually happens then to deal with such issues? I mean, in terms
there's not
media bodies.
Yeah, well, it's sort of self-policing because there's not much that can be done. Tucker Carlson, and I'm glad that's the case. He has First Amendment rights to do that, as long as he doesn't defame somebody, which again is very difficult to prove, or libel somebody. He can say whatever he wants, and that's what it should be. But it still concerns me that so many people believe him.
That's quite interesting because in the context of Africa or Botswana, you cannot say whatever you want.
Yeah,
I mean, he would have been in a hot mess.
Oh wow.
Yes, he would have been in a hot mess. I don't think we'll be taken casually as you are.
Yeah.
Given how misleading the.
Well, that's the thing about America. For all it's got some faults, but it's also got a lot good going for it, including the First Amendment to the Constitution, which guarantees freedom of the press. And it means they can't stop you from saying anything. They don't have to like it. You can say just almost anything you want. There are a few small things. You can't incite somebody to violence, say, go shoot that person. But short of that, 99.9% of the time, you can say whatever you want. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't punishments for it in society. And sometimes people think that, oh, you're just censoring me. You're coming down on me because I said something unpopular. It's like, no, you said something that is unpopular, and your fellow citizens don't want to talk to you or have anything to do with you. But that's different than the government coming down on you.
Okay. Like we had a brief discussion earlier yesterday. The media plays a huge role in shaping public opinion. And especially during elections. The U.S. is going through elections. I want to go back to the discussion on artificial intelligence because I have been studying this and looking at it from a distance. I do feel like it presents a serious conundrum for journalists and newsrooms with regards to sourcing, the sourcing of news. Someone called me earlier this morning and they were complaining about a news outlet here that had published a report, a UN report, which I'm suppose they might have downloaded it and believe that is credible. But the same agency says, we don't have that report and we don't know about it, you know. And they say, okay, can you connect me with the guy so that I can try and understand where they got the report? Yeah. And I was like, okay, these are common mistakes. Now with artificial intelligence now, you can actually fabricate almost everything into reality. So how can journalists and media houses be able to do their job diligently while navigating these pitfalls? Well,
I think AI can have some good attributes to it. It can be helpful for synthesizing information, putting together summaries and giving you like a paragraph of information. You don't need several pages, but you have to be so careful with it. And personally, I'm pretty cautious about using like Chat GPT or something like that, where it summarizes anything. I'd rather do my own summaries. Okay. I'm skeptical of it in journalism.
How do you see it shaping the ongoing American elections?
Well, we have to be real careful that that people don't fall for deep fakes and these false pictures of people, literally pictures, but also descriptions. And it's really up to individual citizens to have to be that diligent. I'm not always so optimistic on that front, but we're just gonna have to do our best on it.
Okay. On another issue that I would like to have you weigh in your opinion, I mean, the recent comments about Kamala Harris and infertility issues. What do you have to say about that?
Honestly, I hadn't heard that one. I know there are attacks. Yes. Attacks are part of campaigns.
Yes.
You know, I wouldn't even want to justify it and give it too much breathing space. Yeah. So I think I'll let that one go because that's just so far out there, outlandish.
Okay. Tell me about the bias in the media, because right now also in the US, it's a hot topic right now, and how media organizations in the US strive to minimize bias reporting.
Yeah. News organizations generally try to be down the middle and impartial and unbiased. Doesn't always work. Everybody has opinions. Everybody has a background of view point that they bring to the world. But I think the better organizations are pretty careful about that. Now, not everybody wants unbiased news. Like the American television scene, there's CNN, which is pretty much down the middle. Then there's MSNBC, which is very Democratic leaning, and Fox News, which is the opposite, Republican, conservative leaning. A lot of people like that kind of comfort food in media. They want to hear their views ratified. It's called confirmation bias, where it just confirms whatever you actually believe. Personally, I'm not a fan. I'd rather be challenged. I like hearing new ideas. Just hearing, even if I agree with it, hearing the same thing over and over again, it's kind of boring after a while.
Would you think something like that would actually work in the media landscape such as Botswana?
Yeah, I think that it might be a challenge because the population is just smaller.
Yes.
I think that only works because there's enough base of information. There's tens of millions of people that probably believe that. Remember, even the highest rated cable shows at night, they get about 3 million viewers, which sounds like a lot of people, but in a country of 330 million, that's like 1% or so. Of it. So it's still a small group of people. And usually the number of people viewing are much lower than that. It's like 700,000 or 800,000. So I'm not sure you would have that diversity of media. I'm just not sure the numbers are there.
Okay.
But, it'd be interesting to try.
Okay. No, as a journalist, as we are trying to wrap up this, I want to just learn a few more things. What do you think are the biggest challenges and opportunities facing journalism today in general that maybe we need to take advantage of?
Yeah, well, the biggest challenges, unfortunately, is the business model. The one that I came up with, you probably came up with, where advertising pretty much drove news, and you could just pay for most journalist salaries based on advertising and subscriptions.
Yes.
Those days are gone, and we have to look for much newer sources of funding, which leads to the second part, which I think is a positive, in that there's a great new world for all kinds of other new news outlets out there that did not exist, maybe didn't exist before. There was a time when in the US, at least, there were only 3 major networks, ABC, NBC, and CBS, a handful of influential newspapers. If you didn't see those, what they put out once a day, that was it. You had no chance. Tough luck. You missed it. Now, you can watch news any time of the day. When I flew over here from Washington, D.C., long trip through Ethiopia and then down here to Botswana, I didn't get to see much of the news. I turned on CNN, and within 20 minutes, I was caught up on the main news. I looked online, got a little bit more, and there's so many more news outlets that have a chance to thrive that I think that's the most positive thing, that you don't have to have gatekeepers anymore. Yeah. You don't need some huge organization where you rent out some big building and TV studio and all that. You just have a few people doing it and put up your own site. And if you can come up with new news that you actually break and new content that people want, you can succeed with it.
Yeah, I like that you mentioned that, because we're having this discussion just right about this week.
Yeah.
There's obviously an emergence of new platforms, media platforms, online platforms, digital platforms, new newspapers. I wouldn't like to say all of a sudden, but because you never know how long people were planning.
Yeah.
I've been planning my stuff for the past 3 years.
Oh, yeah.
When I start now, I'll be putting myself also bandwagoning myself in that. But I think maybe a fair assessment is to say, first of all, is the principles of good journalism and the ethics at the very top of it. But the whole thing, the gatekeepers of yesterday are losing power in the gatekeepers today, because everyone has skill. A lot of people have skills. The tools are freely available. We have a lot of youth that are unemployed, and they can see opportunities in these spaces. And in our context, we have had a lot of legacy media that when the digital when the digital revolution was hitting a curve, a lot of people were resistant to the change.
Yes.
Now it's catching up. It's not even catching up not only in terms of business. Since the past 10 years, we're seeing a deep dive in business. Now it's catching up in terms of new players entering the market with ease.
Yeah.
And being able to also participate in shaping public opinion.
Yeah, that's so important that you have all these new voices coming out here. And I take the point, it's not an overnight success. These things take a lot of work to put out. People think they are because they just like appear like that. But there really are so many new outlets, even like in Washington, D.C., which you would think it was already saturated, that there were so many people covering the same stories, but there's always room for something new that pops up. I think the real importance is covering something unique and distinctive that everybody else isn't, like one faction of politics or sports or business, and doing it really well rather than trying to cover everything and just be kind of mediocre at it.
That's quite interesting because I think maybe sometimes we fail to go the specialization route where we can really be an expert in our own area of trade.
And that's what people really are looking for, is some kind of expertise, especially when world news happens somewhere. They want to turn to places that really are that can tell you exactly what's going on inside and out. And there's not that many places, news outlets that exist like that.
But tell me, what makes obviously I'm going to ask a question from naivety. What makes the media in the US more powerful?
Than, say, Botswana?
Botswana. Right now, we've been having the elephant debate. And you find that obviously we can tell our own voices.
Yeah.
But you can clearly see that British media, UK media, besides the population, I'm trying to understand the deeper intricacies of what happens in the newsroom that makes them so.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one is the size, just because there's so much more, but also the U.S., it does have the First Amendment, which it guarantees freedom of the press. And I think that's part of the fabric of society, where people can spout off, say what they want, criticize the government. The whole U.S. Constitution is written with a kind of profound mistrust of government. The idea is not to give any one branch too much power, any one person too much power, because we have so much world history of dictators taking over, and we're really trying to avoid that. So I think in the US, there's a particularly robust tradition of a media going after public figures, not going after like trying to harden them, but dig up information that the voting public should know before they make the choice, particularly if public figures present themselves one way, but really act differently in their private lives.
Do you also not feel that people seldom look at the picture this way, that also having access to information and a free press is also an economic decision?
Well, yes, people...
It has larger economic benefits.
Yes, well, that's how people make decisions, particularly like if you're coming business, you got to give accurate information. People want to know what stocks to buy or sell or whatever it might be. Even if you're giving the weather report, you want it to be accurate that people can bring an umbrella or bring the right coat, level coat or whatever.
And plan your events.
Exactly.
And all the likes, because there's money involved. But we seldom have the discussion from that angle. We always speak about, obviously, the press, the people, and all of that. But I always say that having accurate and the right information forms part of business intelligence. It helps governments decide. It helps in bilateral relations. It helps businessmen decide how they are going to invest, divest, and move around. It helps in knowing how you're going to buy your groceries, budgeting and all the likes. But we seldom have the conversation in that manner. I never even see economists helping us in this discussion in that manner, because I feel like maybe it could change the thinking. People could soften up their stance, because every time we talk about it, it's like you're looking for information
I hadn't thought of it that way. Yeah, that's a good point.
For the wrong things. Sometimes you're looking for information for the right reasons, you know, that are beneficial even to the people in power. So as I want to wrap up this conversation, what other things, or maybe in your parting ways, what would you like to share with us and maybe my fellow media partners and friends in the industry that maybe you think will help us shape our skills and sharpen ourselves?
Yeah, well, I'm really impressed with the media situation in Botswana. There's a big cross-section of news outlets, newspapers. It seems to be growing. That's my sense of it. And a lot of online outlets as well. So that's something to watch over. I think, again, that getting some kind of Access to Information Act is really important. If there's really, I think there could be pressure maybe on the government to release more, to write down more of what it does, because it seems to me that's part of what the challenge is. You don't even know what the government is up to. I mean, nobody would if they were covering it, because they're very careful what to write down and what not to, and what to keep secret. So I think it's always good to watch outlets from outside the country too, and get best practices, see how they cover stories, and those journalists that are really aggressive and asking questions. I think there's a lot to be learned from media outside the country as well.
Okay. Has your friend taken you out for a beer?
Not specifically.
How have you experienced Botswana so far? Because it's very, very important.
Yeah, I'm going to get to see some of the game in the outer areas.
Okay.
Saw something we don't see much, like animals, monkeys at the university. That was fun to be able to see. But looking forward to getting to see more of the country.
Okay. No, that would be great. I'll be encouraging them that when we have visitors, they need to take them to the Delta, to all of this, and see our tourism. Obviously, there are no budgets and funds are not paid, but it will be, it's a wish and an ideal that every visitor who comes here should be able to see our backyard. Like when we visit America, obviously, the first place we show us, go and see the White House, go and see the Statue of Liberty, and all the likes. So,
there are a lot of American visitors to Botswana. I was just discovering plenty of people coming here on the flight. Just when I was telling people I've come in here, a lot of people have actually visited, seeing safari or other things. So I think it's getting more. It's more on the radar screens of Americans now.
Okay. No, thank you very much, David.
Thank you.
Thank you for staying tuned. I was with David Mack. You have heard everything. You have heard his bio. David Mack is a veteran journalist who is practicing in the US, and also he's around to come and lecture and share his experiences with some of our media fraternity partners and people in the academia, especially in the University of Botswana, courtesy of the US Embassy in Botswana. My name is Lawrence Seretse. This is for Knowledge Seekers, and the Punchline podcast is wrapping up.